you've ever played Vampire Survivors, which I imagine you have if you're watching a video like this, you'll know that Vampire Survivors is heavily inspired by the Castlevania series of games. A number of characters and weapons have a very Castlevania feel to them. So I was a little mixed when I heard about Castlevania as the theme of their next DLC. On one hand, it made a lot of sense. On the other, I was worried that it would be hard to include a lot without getting a bit too close to many of the weapons from the base game. Turns out that I didn't really have to worry too much, but we'll get into that in a minute. The Ode to Castlevania DLC for Vampire Survivors is $3.99 in the store. Now you may be like, why is this $1.50 more expensive than the other crossover DLC and only like $1 cheaper than the base game? Well, the reason for that is that this DLC is huge. I would wager to say that certain aspects of this DLC are bigger than all the other DLCs combined. So let's take a closer look at what Ode to Castlevania gives you. Like previous DLCs, you start your DLC experience by playing the new map, which is Dracula's Castle. You then need to find a coffin to unlock the first character, and then you get to start exploring what the DLC has to offer. Unlike other DLCs, this map is huge. The map also includes a number of interesting aspects. Some of these are brand new aspects, and others are ones that have been implemented in previous DLCs, but this takes it to a whole new level. Spread over the large map are bosses. These bosses show up as red skulls on your map and will show up as like a red summoning circle on the ground when you see it on screen. So to summon the boss, you have to step on this summoning circle and they'll appear. These bosses will at least drop a chest, but some of them will drop certain weapons, secret items, or even a key to unlock more of the castle. Thankfully, this key carries over to other plays and you don't have to defeat that boss in every play of the map. This key will also activate a teleporter to make traveling throughout the castle a bit easier. In addition to this, there are also many new characters and weapons. The store page says that there is over 20 plus new characters and 40 plus new weapons and evolutions. You may think that this is just a way to round, but that plus here is doing a lot of heavy lifting for this DLC. There are over double the amount of characters, weapons, and evolutions in the DLC than advertised. That's a ton of content. I'm not going to list the exact amount since it seems to be a bit of a surprise that they're wanting to keep, but this DLC has just an amazing amount of content. A number of weapons and characters in here are just more than I would have ever expected coming into it. I played the DLC for about 12.5 hours at this point, and while I've unlocked all of the advertised characters and weapons, I am not super close to unlocking all of the ones revealed later in the DLC after a particular event. As I said, this DLC is massive and is just going to give you so much more to unlock for the game if you're wanting more Vampire Survivors. Now, after the last couple of crossover DLCs, you might be wondering how evolving new weapons goes in this game. Did they add some unique passive item like the mini crewmates of Emergency Meeting or the weapon power-ups of Operation Guns? Thankfully, the answer is no. There are 2 new passive items, but these are treated more like the base passives and evolve certain weapons and not some extra thing unique for every weapon in the DLC. There are also weapons that just evolve on their own and ones that require a collection of similar weapons to evolve them, kind of like the Spell Strike combo. And another new addition for this DLC are weapon selectors. These allow you to select weapons from different categories. For example, the Morning Star will allow you to choose one of the whips from the DLC and so on. There's also a passive that allows you to select familiars to add as allies also, which is kind of a fun little addition to the game. And I don't think that this really counts as a passive, even though that's where the familiar will go whenever you choose it. I don't know that it really fills up a slot. So that's really what this adds. It adds a ton of characters, a ton of weapons, some fun little items that allow you to have some choice, as well as a couple of new passive items as well. It also has a huge map that has a lot going on. So you are getting quite a bit out of this DLC. It is a little bit more expensive, but it is giving you much more than you would expect at even that price. So with all this content, the answer to the question, is it worth buying, may seem a bit silly. Yes, I highly recommend this DLC. In fact, if you were to only get one DLC for Vampire Survivors, this would probably be the one that I would recommend. This is even more emphatic if you're a fan of Castlevania as well. There is just so much content here that while it is more expensive than the previous DLCs, you're probably getting more bang for your buck compared to the other DLCs, especially if you set out to unlock everything this DLC has to offer. While I have enjoyed enjoyed the last two crossover DLCs, I'll admit that there were parts that I didn't like quite so much. Mainly the way that they handled new passive items that they added to the game. This DLC doesn't really have that issue. The worst thing that I can say about this DLC is that figuring out some of the ways that you need to unlock the next character or whatever can be a little bit more complicated than some of the other ones, but honestly that's also part of the fun of Vampire Survivors in my opinion, so it's not really that bad. Probably just depends on who you are. If you're not really wanting to figure things out, then it could get a little frustrating. Granted, do a quick search on the internet and you'll probably be able to find the answer to what you need to do. Now, while I may have been worried when I first heard this DLC announced, it far exceeded all of my expectations. The weapons were fun and unique, the map large and full of secrets and interesting bosses, and the DLC is just so packed with new stuff that it almost feels like a whole game all of its own. As I said earlier, if you only wanted to buy one DLC for Vampire Survivors, this is it. At least until they release one that tops this, if that's even possible.